We've all heard the saying that history repeats itself. But the real question, the much more personal one, is why do we keep repeating our own mistakes, even when we can see the disaster coming? Today we're going to dive deep into that question, looking at everything from ancient myths to modern psychology to figure out if there's any way to actually break the cycle.
You know, there's this old Polish proverb. The wolf carried something off several times, then they carried the wolf off. It's one of those sayings that just hits you with its truth, you know? It perfectly captures this timeless idea of repetition and consequence, a pattern that's not just in our oldest stories, but in our most modern anxieties too.
So how do we even begin to answer that? To really get to the bottom of it, we have to look at the archetypes, the fundamental stories and mental blueprints that have shaped the way we see the world for thousands of years, from the myths of the ancient world right up to the movies we stream today.
Here's the path we're going to take. We'll start with those universal myths, then we'll journey inward to the prisons we build in our own minds, then zoom out to the invisible rules of society, and finally land on how all of this gets processed and sold back to us in modern culture. So, let's jump in.
First up, this idea that doing the wrong thing over and over again will eventually lead to your downfall, that's not just from one proverb. It's a piece of wisdom you can find pretty much anywhere you look in human history.
I mean, just look at these. From ancient Rome to China to the Bible, they're all saying the same basic thing. It's like they all tapped into this kind of moral physics, the idea that every repeated action has an equal and totally unavoidable reaction. You get what you put in.
And these little nuggets of folk wisdom, they get their real power when they're blown up into the grand, epic stories of mythology. This is where humanity first really built the vocabulary we still use to talk about right, wrong, and what happens when you cross the line.
And the ancient Greeks, well, they had a perfect word for the kind of pride that was just asking for trouble: hubris. And it's important to get this right. It wasn't just being a bit arrogant. Hubris was the act of spitting in the face of the natural order, of trying to be more than human, a fatal mistake.
And once someone committed an act of hubris, it set off this predictable, almost mechanical four-stage chain reaction. It starts with the prideful act, the hubris. That leads to 8, which is a state of reckless delusion. And that, in turn, calls down nemesis, the spirit of divine vengeance, which finally ends in krisis, total catastrophic ruin. For the Greeks, this wasn't just a good story, it was cosmic law.
Now, here's where things get really interesting, because not everyone saw cosmic justice the same way. In the West, you generally have this idea of an external judge, a god or gods who see your sin and hand down a sentence. But in the East, you get a concept like karma, which is more like a law of nature. The consequence isn't delivered by someone, it's built into the action itself. It's an internal, self-operating system.
And this idea that consequences echo beyond just one person, it's baked right into foundational religious texts. This suggests that these destructive patterns aren't just individual screw-ups. They can become a kind of family heirloom, a curse passed down from one generation to the next.
You know, storytellers have this brilliant device to make justice feel earned and poetic. It's called contrapass, where the punishment is a perfect, ironic reflection of the crime. Think about Cinderella's stepsisters trying to deceive the prince by changing their foot size. Their punishment is to literally mutilate their feet. The punishment becomes a self-inflicted version of their original lie.
But here's the thought. What if the judge, the jury, and the executioner aren't out there at all? What if they're inside our own heads? Modern psychology suggests the prisons we can't escape are the ones we build for ourselves. Sigmund Freud had a name for this, the repetition compulsion. And his really crucial insight was this: trauma isn't just a ghost that haunts your past. It's more like a movie director that scripts your future. It's this unconscious pull to recreate painful situations over and over again. Not because we want to, but because we're stuck in the pattern. We become the architects of our own repeating sorrow. And what's really wild is that this isn't just theory anymore. Modern science is actually catching up to this ancient idea. A 2022 study showed that intense trauma can literally leave a biological mark on our genes, an epigenetic change that passes the echo of that suffering down to children and grandchildren who never even lived through the event. So this is the big shift in thinking, right? The punishment is no longer a lightning bolt from an angry god. It's something much quieter and maybe much more terrifying. It's psychic imprisonment. It's the hell of being trapped in a destructive loop you created yourself. A prison that has no bars, just the endless hallways of your own mind. But of course, we're not just minds floating in a void. These internal loops get tangled up with, reinforced by, and sometimes even demanded by the world around us.
by society's invisible scripts.
The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu had a fantastic concept for this. He called it habitus. Think of it like social software that gets installed in us from the day we're born. It's not about conscious choices, it's that gut feeling, that instinct for how to behave, what to want, how to speak. And it often locks us into the patterns of our class, our family, our background, without us ever realizing it's happening.
And the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche pushes this to its most terrifying conclusion with his thought experiment of the eternal return. He asks you to imagine a demon telling you that you have to live this exact life with every mistake, every joy, every moment of pain, over and over forever. Is that good news? Or is that the heaviest weight imaginable, an inescapable curse?
So we have these deep, ancient archetypes and these powerful psychological patterns. What happens when a modern industrial machine gets its hands on them and decides to turn them into a product? This brings us to a critical look at our own culture.
And this is where the philosopher Theodor Adorno comes in. He argued that the modern culture industry takes these powerful, dangerous myths and basically declaws them, turning them into safe, predictable entertainment. Take Prometheus. His transgression against the gods brought him eternal agony. It was a terrifying moral warning. But the modern superhero? His transgressions are rewarded with box office success, a line of action figures, and a guaranteed sequel. It's not a warning, it's a repeatable formula.
Adorno had a name for this trick: pseudo-individualization. It's the illusion of choice. We're sold what looks like a new movie, a new song, a new hero, but underneath the shiny new paint job, it's the exact same standardized formula. It's designed to be consumed passively, not to be thought about critically. It keeps the loop going, just with a different costume each time.
And that leads to Adorno's most damning question. Does all this mass entertainment actually neutralize the moral terror that these old stories were supposed to give us? By turning every warning into a safe, consumable product, are we just becoming passive spectators, instead of people who might actually learn from the mistakes of the past?
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. You've got these deep psychological patterns inside us, you've got the invisible social scripts around us, and you've got a mass media culture that constantly feeds us the same repeating stories. All of these forces are pushing us into the same loops. Which leaves us with a final, and frankly, a deeply unsettling question for our time. In an age of recommendation engines and filter bubbles, has punishment itself evolved? Is the 21st century prison just a quiet, algorithmic entrapment? A system that endlessly feeds us the very patterns we know we can't resist, essentially turning Nietzsche's philosophical horror story of eternal return into our personalized, perfectly optimized, daily social media feed?